This video and all of its contents, including any opinions expressed by the narrator, are strictly for entertainment purposes only and is not intended in any way as a substitute for professional services and consultation from a licensed therapist, doctor, attorney, or other licensed professional service provider. Each person must make their own life decisions, and those decisions are theirs. Welcome back to Find Your Alpha, the channel that never uses AI computerized voices to read stories. This week I'm back at you with another great video story, and you can see the title right on your screen. I discovered my wife had a 6-month affair 10 years ago. The paternity of my daughter is now in question. Let's get into this story and see what it's all about. And the OP starts out and he says, I'm looking for opinions from other men who have faced something similar. My wife and I are both in our late 40s. We met in college and dated for 3 years before getting married in 1996. We have a son 25 and a daughter who is 9. Yes, you read that right. There's a 16-year age gap between our children. I'll discuss this in greater detail later in this post. Just after we got married, I took a job in another city across the state, and we moved shortly thereafter. A year later, my wife gave birth to our son. Right after that, we purchased the home we live in today. It's in a great neighborhood, and we have many good friends here. I couldn't think of a better place to raise a family. My wife has a degree in education, but never seriously pursued a career. She instead chose to be a stay-at-home mom while also working a few days per month as a substitute teacher. Now that our daughter is in school, my wife has been able to pick up a few more days each month. Overall, we get along great, and our marriage had been a solid and happy one until recently. Isn't that what they all say in these stories? Just over a month ago, I was going through some old electronics we stockpiled in the closet of our spare bedroom. My plan was to wipe them clean and take them to the recycle center instead of throwing them in the trash. The box contained old laptops, a desktop, and several tablets that we had collected over the years, as well as a menagerie of chargers, old calculators, and even an old tube TV. I plugged all the devices in to get them charged up so I could make sure all the files were deleted and none of our personal information was on them. It was a tedious task, but it was something I had been wanting to do for a long time. The exercise was uneventful until I got to the tablet my wife used before I bought her the new iPad she uses now. When I powered it up, initially I didn't notice anything needing to be removed, as she really only used the device for browsing, shopping, and social media. I was about to do a reset when I came across an app I didn't know she had been using. I opened the app and there I found hundreds of messages between my wife and another user dating back nearly 10 years ago. Now, what kind of app stores messages from 10 years ago? After reading the messages, I soon deducted that the person she had been communicating with was a former neighbor who lived 2 houses down from us, and that he and my wife had an affair. From their exchanges, it appears the affair started in early May and ended just before Labor Day of that year. They were using the app to arrange meetups at his house or ours. And I put here, that is grimy, because it is. It's bad enough she's cheating on the guy, but to bring that guy back to her house, that is just disgusting. At the time, this guy was a window and door salesman, and I bought a new set of windows and a door from him for our 3-season room. For their final messages, it appears the affair ended when my wife discovered she was pregnant with our daughter. I could see the regret in her messages as she told him she was pregnant and wanted to break things off to rededicate herself to our marriage. Now, was she regretful because she was breaking it off with him, or was she regretful because she cheated? In one of their last messages, he asked her if the child was his. She replied telling him she didn't think so, as she had been intimate with me 4 times that week and only 1 time with him. That is just sick. I mean, mixing it up with 2 guys at the same time, that is just disgusting. The fact that my wife became pregnant with our daughter was a complete surprise to us. After our son was born, my wife was diagnosed with a condition called anovulation, which causes infertility. That's the first I've heard of this condition. Since then, we had been going unprotected for years, even though her doctor always told her there was an outside chance she could get pregnant. Originally, we planned on having a big family, but after the diagnosis, we thought if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. When we found out she was pregnant, I was over the moon with joy about having another child. Reading each of those messages between them was like getting punched in the gut. I couldn't believe it and was completely sickened by the whole thing. Never in a million years would I have dreamed that my wife could ever do something like this. Again, isn't that what all these guys say in these stories? After discovering the messages, I was about to confront her, but then something inside me told me to stop and to think it through. Now that's smart because you may have done something foolish, you may have done something rash, and it's always better to step back, even though you've got a lot of emotion going, and think about it before you act. He says, give it a little more thought and do a little more investigating before making any decisions I may regret later. After all, this happened nearly 10 years ago, and our marriage has been wonderful, especially since the birth of our daughter. And I put a big question mark up here because how can you claim that your marriage is wonderful when you have proof that your wife cheated on you? Come on, mister. Then I thought, my God, what if my daughter isn't mine? What would I do? I know I'd still love her, but how would I react? Even if it turned out she wasn't mine, I'd love her just the same, although my heart would be broken far beyond what my wife had already done. For the rest of the day, I went on as normal as if I hadn't seen the messages. I took all the old electronics, except for my wife's old tablet, of course, to the recycle center. My daughter came with me and I took her out to lunch afterwards. This all happened exactly 4 weeks ago today, and since that time I've shut everything out of my mind and have been going on as normal. As I said, my marriage has been wonderful. No, it hasn't. And I love my kids with my entire being. If I confront my wife about the affair, it will open up a Pandora's box, which could end our marriage and potentially reveal that my daughter isn't mine. I definitely don't want to cause any pain for my daughter, and I don't think I want to end my marriage. At least that's how I felt at the time. I was progressing down the path of doing nothing, and things were going pretty well until Friday when I suddenly had a change of heart. It was then I had a strong feeling of anger and betrayal wash over me. I thought it would subside, but instead it has progressively gotten worse throughout the weekend. I now feel like I want to confront my wife and make her explain herself, then confront her lover and extract a pound of flesh from him for what he did to me. I realize now they are both scum and deserve to be punished. So this guy really had an about face here. While I would never physically hurt anyone, that's smart, never employ violence unless it's for self-defense, as I always say, I do want them to pay dearly for what they did. The guy and his family moved away the year after the affair took place, and I don't believe my wife has ever had contact with him since, but who knows? You know, that's interesting because I think this is like the third story I've done where a wife or maybe it was a fiance hooked up with somebody in the neighborhood, and then that AP, that affair partner, moves away. It's just interesting how these stories have these similarities where the AP gets out of Dodge. I've now got this sudden urge to tell his wife and destroy his marriage, making him suffer as I have been for the past month. I've also got this drive to get my daughter DNA tested without telling my wife. Even though it will not change how I feel about her, I've got to know. If it turns out she's mine, I'll probably choose to forget the whole thing and just move on with life. That is a mistake. You're going to let your wife get away with this? You take action. You're a man. Step up and do what you need to do. That's where my mindset is today. And that's why I've decided to make this post to get some feedback. I really can't talk to anyone about this since I don't want it getting out. Based on all the facts I've provided you here, what would you do if you were me? And that's the end of his original post. And now we're going to take a look at a few of the responses he got from the community. But before we do that, I want to encourage you, if you've liked what you've heard so far, hit that like button right now. That will help get this video seen by people all over this beautiful planet. Now, let's take a look at some of those responses. The first one is from a woman. She says, I'll respond as someone who's been in your wife's situation. To summarize, I had a brief and foolish affair with a deacon from our church. It lasted less than a month, and during that time I became pregnant. I didn't tell my husband, but he found out 9 years later through old written correspondence I had with a man. There was no texting or social media back then, so everything was done with calls, notes, and letters. My husband reacted totally different than what I expected. Up to that point, he had always been a kind and generous man. He became very mean, stopped speaking to me, and DNA tested our daughter. Well, what did you expect him to do? The results showed he wasn't her father. He divorced me even though we had 5 kids together, including our aforementioned daughter, who was the youngest. Over the years, I begged for his forgiveness, but he never gave it. He did, however, continue to be a wonderful father to all of our kids, including our daughter. I'm 64 now and have never remarried. I really haven't dated anyone else. I'm still full of regret for the mistake I made long ago. My husband did remarry and led a happy life until he passed away 2 years ago at the age of 69. I hope things work out for you and your wife. Well, the takeaway from your response is that your husband did the right thing by divorcing you and moving on with his life because he remarried someone else, and you even said he lived a happy life until he passed away. And guess what? He also got to keep his children and have a good relationship with his children. So I think the guy did the right thing in this case. The next response is from a guy. He says, reading your story was gut-wrenching, as I experienced something like this with a live-in girlfriend 6 years ago. I found out 8 months after the birth of what I thought was our son that he wasn't mine. It broke my heart and crushed my soul, and I seriously contemplated ending it all. Never contemplate taking yourself out. Never even consider that, because you're worth so much more. Don't let one person drag you down. Nobody is worth that much. He continues on. He says, thankfully I didn't, and instead walked away from her and her child and never looked back. To this day, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. That was almost 7 years ago, and I'm now married to a great woman, and we have 2 beautiful children together. So here's another example of the guy moving on and actually getting a better life. As far as I know, my ex has never had another relationship, and for years she tried getting me back before I got married. I've occasionally seen her and her son around town, and each time I do get a little sad for the boy and hope he has a good life. It is a shame for this little boy who now has to grow up in a single mother-led household. Not to take anything away from single mothers, because there are some really good ones out there. But if you look at what's happened to society and the breakdown therein, I think a lot of it can be attributed to children growing up in households where there's no father present. Again, not to take anything away from some of these single mothers out there that do a good job, but that's just my observation. Next, here's another response from a woman. She says, thank you for your post. I've responded to tell you that things can turn out beautifully for you and your wife, even if you find out your daughter is not yours. My husband and I are living proof of that. Oh boy. We have 3 children together, including our middle child, who was conceived from a short-lived affair I had with a family acquaintance. Well, isn't that nice? It was the worst decision of my life because it jeopardized my marriage, but it was also the best decision of my life because my husband and I were blessed with our daughter. Initially, when he found out, my husband had his mind set on divorcing me and was taking steps to revoke paternity. But once he held our daughter, he had a change of heart. That was 16 years ago, and my husband loves our daughter as much as his 2 biological kids. My daughter adores her dad and wants nothing to do with her biological father. Also, despite what some people on here may say, my husband is not a simp. He's a strong and happy man, and I can assure you he's been well cared for by me over the years. Well, I'd like to talk to your husband to get his side of things, because I'm sure he probably would tell a different story. And finally, we've got another response from a guy, and he's short and sweet with his response. He says, rug sweeping never works, my friend. It will eat you alive and start impacting other parts of your life. You need to DNA test both your kids. Yes, I mean both of them, and he has both in capital letters. From what I've experienced, cheaters are cheaters. If you caught her once, I would wager she probably had been cheating on you all along and gotten away with it. Stop thinking only about the well-being of others and start taking care of yourself too. That's good advice from that guy, especially that last sentence, because so many men are always looking out for the well-being of others and they really don't take care of themselves. And guess what? If something happens to you, it's not only going to impact you, but it's going to impact your kids and the rest of your family. So take care of yourself, guys. And now we're going to take a look at some updates he put out after his original post. The first one happened 2 weeks later. He says, "I've come back to update everyone on my situation. I first want to thank everyone who responded. I thought I may get a few good responses, but was overwhelmed by the stories and outpouring of support I received. Now for the update. After thinking things through for another week, I decided to confront my wife with the evidence. I sat her down, pulled out her old laptop, and started reading the messages. She started weeping, isn't that what they all do, and asked me to stop. But I didn't and continued to read the messages until she ran out of the room and into our bedroom. She stayed in there for a good 45 minutes before returning to talk to me. So what she was doing there, I'm sure, is she was like, oh man, I didn't realize he was going to find this out. Let me get away and then go craft my story, and then I'll come back out and spin the story to him. I think that's what she was doing. He says, when she did, the first thing I asked her was why. Why did she do it? She said she didn't know and that it was stupid. Now listen to this. She says, she then said she felt like we were having marital problems back then and I was becoming distant. So being vulnerable, she latched on to someone who showed interest in her. So she's trying to pass the blame and she's trying to gaslight this guy. You can see it as clear as day. He says, I called her out on this as we've never had any marital problems and I never was distant ever. I told her she needed to explain that one, but she couldn't come up with an answer. Again, that's because she's gaslighting you. She said it was one terrible mistake out of 27 great years and I should forget it as I have nothing to worry about. I told her she may forget it, but I never will. I asked her how long the affair lasted and she said about 6 months. So that's a little longer than what he thought from those messages, because the messages, I think he said it looked like it started in early May and ended before Labor Day. So that's 4 months. But she's saying it lasted 6 months, and it probably lasted longer than that if the truth is known. She insisted they were only together 6 or 7 times, like that meant something. I told her only 6 or 7 times? You only had S with another man 6 or 7 times? Wow. Thank you. She then started begging me, dropping to the floor and crying at my feet. I let her cry there for a while before telling her to get up and sit on the couch. I then told her to go and move all her stuff into the spare bedroom. Next, I explained that I would be DNA testing our daughter and possibly even our son. Hearing this, she burst into tears, saying that wasn't necessary as both kids were mine. I asked her how she was so sure. She said because she only cheated with the one guy and that our daughter's conception date was during a period where she only had relations with me. I told her not according to your messages. I then read the message where she told him that during that week she was with me 4 times and him only once. She again started crying and I got up and left her there. She started crying because you busted her in another lie. That's why she's crying. Later that afternoon, she moved all her things into the spare room. Now that's a good thing. A number of these stories I've been reading lately, the guys are wising up and they're not moving out of the master bedroom. They're making their wives move out of the master bedroom and into a spare room. And that's the right thing to do. While she was doing that, I ordered paternity testing kits from 2 different companies. The kits arrived a week later and I collected the required samples. I told my daughter it was just a doctor's test we needed to do. To reward her for being such a trooper, I took her out for an afternoon of bowling and games at Main Event that Saturday. Now I'm just waiting to get the results back. It's really nerve-wracking and it's negatively impacting my sleep cycle and my mental health. I want to get the results back ASAP, but I'm also terrified of what they may reveal. Once I get the results, I'll come back with another update. And that's the end of his first update. And now he comes back with his final update. And the final update came 89 days after that last update, so almost 3 months later. He says, I apologize for not updating sooner, but things have been a little hectic for me to say the least. Let me first give you the best news. My daughter is my child. Both of the at-home tests came back with over 99% surety that I am her biological father. That was my biggest concern throughout this whole ordeal, and I can't tell you what a relief that was. The results came in just over a week after I returned the samples, though I still haven't told my wife or anyone else for that matter. My wife has never brought the subject up again, and neither have I. I'm sure she's still consumed with fear that I may not be the father, and that's okay by me. So he's letting her suffer a little bit. If she ever asks me about it, I'll tell her the truth, but I have no plans to voluntarily do so. As for my marriage, we are legally separated, but still living at the same address. Sorta. Our property has an outbuilding garage on it with an attached efficiency apartment. I'm living there and will continue to do so until I eventually divorce my wife. After we bought the house, we initially planned to rent it out, but decided to keep it as a guest quarters for visiting relatives and friends. We also let our son live out there from his junior year in high school until he graduated from college. It was a good way for him to acclimate to being on his own. It's a nice space at just over 420 square feet with a full bathroom, an efficiency kitchen, and a big living room. After my son moved out, I used the space as my man cave when it was not being occupied by visitors. It's even got its own address, which I had to get reestablished with the post office, which was a feat in itself. The reason I've not yet moved forward with the divorce is I don't want to be apart from my daughter even for a day. Now, you have a lot of these guys saying that, and I totally understand it. He says, according to my attorney, even though our state has laws favoring the betrayed spouse, so he must live in an at-fault state, the best custody outcome I could have gotten was 50%. I didn't want that. I want to see my baby girl every day. In our state, a couple can remain legally separated indefinitely. My attorney did caution me on living in the same house, but said since the structure was separate from the main house and has its own address, there should be no issues. While my wife doesn't like being legally separated, she's glad we haven't divorced and is holding out hope we'll reconcile. That's not going to happen, but I let her think there's a chance just to maintain a healthy environment for my daughter. Right now, we're on very good terms, and I feel good because I'm controlling all the cards. On the advice of my attorney, we've equally split all of our assets except for the house. That will happen when we eventually do divorce. Now, I'm surprised at that because I didn't know during a legal separation that you split the assets. I thought you did that after the divorce. So that's news to me. Also, as of the separation date, I've required my wife to start contributing half of the upkeep of our house. That's smart. We set up a new joint account for this purpose, and every month she has to contribute $929 into the account, which covers half the bills, taxes, and homeowners insurance. She also has to pay for her own car insurance now, as well as buy all her own food and medications, so she's getting a taste of what it's like to be out on her own. My wife has been trying nonstop to convince me to give her another chance. She knows the divorce paperwork is ready to go and sitting at my attorney's office, and I can instruct him to file at any time. Knowing this, she hasn't done anything to upset me, and I actually like the arrangement we have for the time being. Prior to the separation, I required that she give me a detailed timeline of her affair and also break the news to our families, including our son. It was a difficult process for her, and she has been humbled by the process. We both sat down and told our daughter, and she handled it well. She knows we both love her, and everything will be okay no matter what. As for the other man, I paid him back good. I found out where his wife worked and called her at her office. She answered, and I told her who I was. She, of course, remembered me from the neighborhood, and we exchanged a few pleasantries. I then told her I needed to discuss something that I recently found out about my wife and her husband. She went silent and said okay. I think she knew by my tone and the words I used what it was about. She asked if I could tell her now, and I told her it would be best if she called me after work. She said okay, and she would leave early in order to give us plenty of time to talk. About a half hour later, she called me from her car, and I told her everything. Later that night, I emailed her copies of their messages and a copy of my wife's confession letter to me that contained the timeline. So that's interesting. I can understand him sending the messages they exchanged, but he also went one step further and sent his wife's timeline to the AP's wife. I'm sure his wife, if she found out about that, would not be too happy, but hey, she's the one who cheated. She was upset, and he's talking about here the AP's wife, but not emotional. She was angry. They have 3 kids together, ages 19, 17, and 16. She told me she fell out of love with him years ago. She said she was planning to leave him next year after their youngest graduated high school, but said now proof of this affair will be her catalyst to do it now. She thanked me for informing her, and we agreed to keep in touch. Interesting thing, this guy had the nerve to call me on my cell a couple days later. He either got it from a neighbor or found it online somehow. Anyway, I answered the call thinking it was his wife since the area code was the same. I was shocked when he said who he was. He started off apologizing for a good 5 minutes, and I let him go without interrupting. At the end of his apology, he said, I wish we could have worked through this civilly without destroying our families. Hearing this really irked me, and I told him, burn in hell, mother, and hung up. I then blocked his number and haven't heard from him since. The next time I talked to his wife, she told me she had already kicked him out and was in the process of filing for divorce. She explained that he recently had some serious health problems that she nursed him through, and she felt a little guilty leaving him at this stage of his life, but then when she thinks about him cheating on her, any guilt she has quickly evaporates. She said he'll likely not do well on his own as he drinks, doesn't know how to cook or do anything for himself, but she said she doesn't care at this point. She told me she thinks he's cheated on her with other women over the years, but didn't have any concrete proof. Yes, I would say he probably has because, as we always say, once a cheater, always a cheater. She said now that he's old, sick, and fat, no one wants his nasty arse, and neither does she. I like her attitude and spunk, but I definitely wouldn't want to get on her bad side, he says. If the guy wasn't such a dog, I might even feel a little sorry for him, but I don't. That's where the story ends for now. Based on how things have gone so far, I could see us living this way until my daughter graduates, or at least until she gets into her teens. So I think he said she's only 9 years old, so he's going to live like that for maybe another 8, 9 years. Are you crazy? He says, I know a lot of you are going to criticize me for not just divorcing her, but I know most dads on here will understand where I'm coming from. Thank you for your thoughtful messages and stay well. So that's the end of his story. And overall, I think he handled things very well, except the big mistake he is making is not divorcing her and moving on and moving away. Now, I can understand he wants to see his child every day. And if they do divorce, then he's probably at best going to get 50-50. He may get something less than that. So I completely understand that. But man, that living arrangement, living on the same property as his wife, I just think that's, risky, number one. And it also is going to put in play her potentially getting him back. And like I said, I can fully understand he wants to see his daughter every day, but surely there has to be a better way to work things out where he could divorce, live nearby, and still be able to see her just about every day. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. And now I wanted to go through what I think are some of the morals of the story. Number one, how long ago and how many times doesn't matter. If somebody says, oh, it was 10 years ago when I cheated on you and it was only one time, or it was only 2 times, it doesn't matter. The fact that you cheated ends it in my book. Next, illicit affairs take incredible planning and deception. Don't let anyone tell you that, oh, it was just spontaneous and it just happened. No, if it's an ongoing affair, that takes enormous planning and deception to pull that off. And this woman, if she carried this on with a neighbor for 6 months, just think of all the sneaking around they had to do. Next, Every cheater is by default a calculated liar, and therefore you can't trust them with anything. Next, cheaters will gaslight you after they are caught. I've read some of these stories and listened to some of these stories online where guys say, well, I gave her credit because she took all the responsibility for the affair and she's doing everything that she needs to do. But if you dig into the story a little bit further and listen to the words closer, you'll find out that the cheater was actually trying to pass the buck off on them for cheating and not truly accepting full responsibility. And even if they do accept responsibility, they still cheated on you. And as far as I'm concerned, it's over. Next, a cheater cannot be trusted with anything. Like I just said before, if they cheat on you, what else are they going to do to you? I wouldn't trust them with anything after that. Next, after discovering cheating, immediately consult a lawyer. Protect yourself. Protect your assets. Make sure you get everything lined up if you have custody issues. Start working through that, and I would do so before confronting the cheater. Next, and this goes for all men, not just men that are dealing with cheaters, take care of your mental, physical, and financial health. As men, we are always looking out for the well-being of others first, and we put ourselves last. You need to put yourself first, because just like they say when you get on an airplane, if the mask comes down, you put your mask on first before you assist others. Because if you don't, you're going to be taken out. And guess what? They may be taken out because you're not there to help them. So always remember that. And finally, as I always say in all these stories, go your separate ways and move on with your life. This whole idea of him being legally separated and maybe staying like that for years and living on the same property as his wife, man, that just sounds very complicated and messy. My thought would be, get the divorce, go your separate ways, and work out something where you'll be able to see your daughter just about every day. That's what I would look to do. So those are my thoughts, and now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story, and how do you think this guy handled it? Would you have done something similar to what he did, or would you have done something completely different? Tell us about it in the comments. Also, be sure to hit that like button right now, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to this channel, and I will talk to you